There are lots of brands that have gone down market, often unintentionally, can't really ever go back. It's very difficult for people to believe you are a premium brand after you've cheapened yourself. So that's one. And if you are going to make an intentional move to being bulk billing, make sure your cost structure supports being the cheapest, because that's the key. You must have a low cost structure, which is a competitive advantage. Otherwise, you're going to fail.
Hey, welcome back to the Scale My Clinic podcast. Today I'm joined by Todd. Today we're talking about November. November is fast approaching, less than 3 months away. And guess what? The government's promised that we're all bulk billing 90% of everyone, all the time, at least, forever. The question is that true? Or the question is, how do we approach this conundrum? How do we approach potentially a challenge and turn it to an opportunity? And so, Todd, maybe to get us started, it might be useful just to go over a reminder of what those changes are.
Yeah, so as of the 1st of November 2025, there are changes to the government's approach to bulk billing with the triple bulk billing incentive. As we know, that varies based on your triple M rating between 1 and 7. Those that are higher numbers get a higher return for that. And so that is being added to all patients when you bulk bill those. And then there's a further incentive, which is the 12.5% payment that comes like a PIP payment. So a quarter in arrears. And that is based on two objectives being met. GPs will receive that 12.5% by yet a hitherto undeclared mechanism, which is like the PIP, but not the PIP. If they bulk bill all of their attendance visits, then they will receive that 12.5% effective surcharge in a single payment quarterly in arrears. The clinic's obligations are somewhat different in that the clinic's obligations are based on them being formally registered on a government website for bulk billing everybody. So they're effectively declaring that they are a universal bulk billing clinic, no exceptions. And they must have every single GP bulk bill every single one of those attendances for them to qualify for the 12.5% bonus via this PIP-like payment mechanism. That is my understanding, and please fill any gaps that's in there. We don't have all the detail yet, of course, Sachin. Expect that 2 days prior to the launch of this.
And if my Medicare is anything to go by, expect an absolute schmozzle of how the actual mechanisms for that funding you're talking about get worked out and how it actually gets apportioned and remitted to the clinicians and the practice. Buyer beware. So we might start with, what are your options? If I'm a practice owner, I want to decide what to do about these changes, which way to play it. What are the options? Obviously, an option is just suck it up, go all in with the government, join hands, sing kumbaya. Or maybe I've worked, studied, and built hard over the years as a practice owner or as an individual GP. And I'm quite proud of the level of care I give. I like my autonomy to charge how I want. Now I'm a bit worried because if I don't change, what's going to happen to me? So do we just reject it all out, or do we go all in, or what do we do?
Yeah, I think it's a really good question. And I'm going to be honest and say, I think that most owners are not really thinking about this yet. And if you're not thinking about it now, you're probably already in trouble, and you're probably being herded into that, choosing bulk billing as a future. You really need to be engaging your GPs in the practice, because there are consequences of either choice. And there's a group that are probably loosely committed to private billing that, without any proactive and intentional movements, that are probably going to become casualties of this, in that they will almost have to adopt universal bulk billing. And so this is probably a useful framework for this that we work through with our Project X members, Sachin, that might be worthwhile sharing here. Just a simple Cartesian plane. I always think your primary school maths teacher would be very impressed that you're still doing Cartesian planes. But having price on a vertical axis and quality on a horizontal axis. Now, here, I just want people to be okay. I think people really start to get offended when you say the cheaper something is, the quality must be less. Now, almost universally, if you apply this to any service or product, that's almost universally true, that as something gets less expensive, as it becomes cheaper, the quality reduces. And that is okay, and it is something that we expect. But when it comes to healthcare, people often get really offended because they think, well, I'm not offering a cheaper service. I'm not offering actually a lower quality service. I'm going to actually put a stake in the ground and say, if you're offering a cheaper service, then it must be lower quality. Otherwise, you're just suffering the consequences of that, which generally means that you accept a much, much lower income than what you've delivered in regard to value. So they are just different. You would not anywhere expect the cheapest car on the marketplace to perform like the most expensive car on the marketplace. Like, nobody in their right mind would suggest that those two things would be the same without knowing anything more than the cost. And so what we're suggesting is that there is a difference. And broadly speaking, there are 4 positions on that quality and price spectrum. And so all the way to the left is the cheapest in the marketplace, which is lowest price, and it is also the lowest quality. And some examples of this, if you think in the marketplace, would be Aldi, would be Temu, would be Costco. And actually, these are brands that have really passionate followings. You know, people love cheapest in the marketplace for some things. They might not want to see the cheapest dentist or the cheapest accountant or the cheapest lawyer, but they certainly do enjoy cheap. And this is where, again, I think people have difficulty. It's contextual. There is no doubt there is a group of people in healthcare that have no choice but to consume the cheapest, i.e. free healthcare. And so providing cheap and free healthcare at the point of consumption is not in and of itself a bad thing. It just means that you need to restructure the business to address that. And we'll talk about that a bit later. The next step up is where you get to something that is more expensive. And again, there's a bit more in the way of quality. And we call this the value position. And in this position, some brands that fit Toyota, IKEA, Samsung. The Samsung users get a little bit upset over that because I'm going to talk about where Apple sits in a moment. And then Mazda is probably another brand that's in the value. So people who shop here feel like they're only paying a little bit more than the cheapest, but they get value that almost jumps up to the next part of the range. And this is, of course, a spectrum. These are the 4 main spots that businesses occupy, but there can be little ones in between. And then as we jump up further, we end up in a premium market position. And here there's often a few more brands that people will remember. So Apple is premium. You're paying a higher price and you're getting a higher quality. And I know the Samsung people will say, well, we prefer the quality of Samsung. There's a few differences. The way you're going to find out actually is to have a problem with your Apple device. When you go in there and say, hey, it's not working as intended, most commonly they'll just give you a replacement and be done with it. So when you have a problem, you find out who's in the premium box and indeed who isn't. The other brands that, and these are some of the ones that came from the session we ran in Project X, Dyson, R.M. Williams, Peter Alexander for pajamas, BMW, Samsonite, those were ones that came up in this premium part where you're spending a bit of money, but you're getting the quality back. And then there's one above all of these, which is in the luxury and prestige space, this is the highest price and it's also the highest quality group. And so they're the ones that people often have as really aspirational brands. And there's one overarching owner of a lot of these brands, which is LVMH, Louis Vuitton, Moet Hennessy, that have a ton of brands that are in this space. And again, people might find that they enjoy those, whether it comes to having a bag from there or drinking some of the products from that stable or watches or all of those premium things that come with that. And then the one that the audience talked about because they were talking about Samsonite, up here was Rimowa with the travel goods. And so that's broadly speaking the spectrum from cheapest to value, and then from value to premium, and then from premium to luxury and prestige. And I think when you're looking at all of those, Sachin, you'd understand that they would all have different cost bases, different avatars, so different customers, clients, in our case, patients that they serve, those people all have different expectations, and the people who work in those would be different as well. The person who sells a Toyota is not the same person who sells a Rolls Royce. Very different. One is more transactional. One is more about the experience and about being exclusive, a part of a very small community. So they all have different attributes, and it might be worthwhile talking through those.
Cool. So we'll do that in a moment, but let's go straight to the question, which is, all right, I'm going to bite the bullet. I'm going to just go with the flow and jump in bed with the government and just bulk bill everyone, universal bulk billing. You've said already, you gave us at the offset of this conversation, like how the finances roughly work. And then there was one strict thing, which is that you have to sign up to be listed on a government website. So effectively, you're saying you're part of the government de facto. And so I've done that. What are the pros and cons of doing that?
Yeah, so this is really important. I think you're effectively slapping Medicare branding on your practice. And in fact, I wouldn't be surprised if that was an obligation of the agreement with the feds. And at the moment, it's payment in arrears. That will cause some objections from the clinics that are involved in that. And then what I predict is that eventually the government will pay that in advance. When they pay that money in advance based on your prior billings, it'll come with obligations. And we also know that there is an intentional move to reduce the ability to co-bill in that environment, as well as they've flagged a focus on increased on compliance. And we know that most compliance focuses on bulk billed item numbers. So the first thing is, if you commit to this, you are also committing to absolutely keeping your nose clean on compliance, that timer running to meet the criteria for all of those item numbers and only those, not running concurrent timers, not packing and stacking and doing things that are going to attract attention, because they are going to apply a lot of pressure to businesses that bulk bill. And there is no reciprocal commitment on indexation or anything else that goes with this. So expect compliance to rise, and I don't think there's any reason to suspect there'll be a change in indexation, or in fact, quite probably the government would rightfully believe we've done the work here, we don't need to put much more into this. And your background costs, you can't escape having to have a rental, you can't escape having to pay your staff, you can't escape all of the baseline obligations for running that business in Australia, and those will go up at or above inflation, of course. The indexation will go up below inflation. So expect in 5 to 10 years to have to make another decision about whether you can continue with this or not, or have your hand out for the feds. And remember, they could change something else that's a big deal as well. They could change PIP or PNIP, or they could change pathology rental rules. There could be some other areas that they modify that you don't have any levers left to actually work on, other than seeing more patients. So more volume is the only way that you can then increase revenue. And obviously there's a trade-off for quality that many doctors would not be comfortable with going above that. You're signing up to be a level B specialist. Anytime you do a longer consult, there is a drop in the compensation per hour. Anytime that you delegate a consult that is non-delegable, i.e. childhood immunisations, whereby there's no ability to delegate that work to the nurse in regards to the way that you use the item number. So you're still going to need to make sure that you meet the criteria for a level B consult if you're to bill that. Where it comes to health assessments and the chronic condition management, that's not the case. You can certainly use the nurse for leverage there. But I would expect some of those start to change. There's been a really big movement to regulating the hourly rate that GPs can charge. And so I'd expect a lot of that stuff to probably come in over time, as well as QAF-like frameworks. As an NHS refugee, you can smell this stuff a mile away, and you might speak to some of the things that you would put up as orange and red flags here, Sachin.
Yeah, so I think I was in the UK at the time of the contract change to QAF. And what happened is the government underestimated the work that was actually being done by GPs. And I think we'll see this play out with the recent GP CCMP changes. If and when GPs start actually billing the item for all of those that are actually eligible, you really start to see the amount of work done by general practice. But there are some parallels here, because what happened is there were some carrots put in front of doctors to sign the new contract and change over in quaff time. Then, as practices started to perform, the bar was just raised constantly, criteria played with, just more hoops to jump through to get the same outcome. And the people that were blamed for that were the GPs, who were actually just doing what they told the government that they had been doing anyway. And the government underestimated the amount of work done by general practice. And so general practice still got blame for doing a really good job. And I think in this setting, the things that I can see, like if you translate them to this new initiative, what I can see is that over time, if not immediately, over time, the 12.5% will become the practice's margin. And then potentially over time, that margin may shrink further as indexation and time moves on and the funding doesn't keep pace with that. And so you may get into this weird situation where a practice is running on a 5 or 7% margin and relies on the 12.5%, not as cream, but partially to break even. And then I think there's some other things that are parallels to the quaff situation, which is in quaff in the UK, the quality outcomes framework, it was very much outcomes driven. So there's a lot of tick boxing that needed to happen to meet evidence of having done certain work. In our setting, the volume of work of consultations will increase inevitably if you do switch to bulk billing. And so alongside that is, of course, increased clinical work for GPs who, since the pandemic, we know burnout has gone up, consulting hours have trended down. So now you've got increased clinical load, but with every clinical case comes the unpaid, unseen, hidden admin. And so if you're seeing 10 patients more a day, maybe you're seeing 30 and now you're seeing 40, then there's another 33% increase in admin and unpaid. And guess what? If you want to charge for it because it's not covered by Medicare. No, because this has all been advertised by the government with the power of government marketing machines, departmental marketing machines, telling the world that everything you do is free. Whether that's true or not doesn't matter, because yes, there's a whole bucket of work that should be, even if you are bulk billing, that is non-Medicare and that you would charge for. But the problem is you've trained your patients to not expect to pay anything. You've also attracted patients who don't want to pay anything. And potentially you've repelled the people from your practice who actually were quite happy with your services and wanted to pay. And they've now found a new home. So then if you decide a few years down the track, well, actually, maybe we will charge, all those patients have made their ways to people who decided to hold their ground, work autonomously as possible. And so now you're in this quandary where the only people that you can attract are the ones who want the free stuff and have been trained that everything's free. So I think that is something that I see significantly. The other thing I see as an opportunity here is these reforms were designed very much clearly with corporates in mind. There's no doubt that there's been corporate influence somewhere.
A big part in the co-design of this, yeah. And we should see relisting of some of those corporates on the back of these changes and future upgrades to earnings. And in 2 or 3 years' time, there'll be the downgrades when all of the inflationary cost pressures catch up with them. But yeah, absolutely.
Right. And so there's going to be corporates who have made these decisions without consulting any of their doctors. And so there's going to be increasing burnout, irritation, frustration amongst doctors who work in these places. They're going to be looking for somewhere to go. And so if you run a place that doctors want to be at, can practice high quality medicine, give patients time, care and attention in a autonomous, independent yet collegiate manner, that's going to be very, very attractive. And so it may be a very nice recruitment pipeline for private practices, because I can promise you it might seem okay for a few months, but over time it does drag you down. And so I think that's going to be an important consideration. And then
so Sachin, just to be really specific there, in most cases, moving from mixed billing to bulk billing means going from 3.5 to 4 patients an hour to 5.5 an hour. So you're talking about 1 to 1.5 extra consults per hour. So that means that your average consult duration is 10 minutes ish. You got some time to get in and out of your room and so forth. And so in an 8-hour day, you're talking about seeing 40, maybe 44 people compared to more like 30 odd people. And so those extra patients require work on the tail, results, pathology results, investigations, referrals to the hospital, specialist letters, all of that stuff needs to be managed as it comes back in. And so the portion of that is probably disproportionately higher than the increase in consultations, because the evidence is pretty clear that when you're bulk billing, you order more investigations as a proxy for time. And so you will be doing substantially more of that work. And then, as you rightly point out, once you're stuck in that world, it's very difficult to exit it and stay in the same practice. And if you own that clinic, it's difficult to exit it. We talked earlier about some of the things you probably want to consider not doing. Childhood immunisations is one that is loss-making when you include the nurse's time as a practice owner. Probably a lot of the stuff in the treatment room, even though you might be able to pay for it, you've attracted an audience of people that by preference don't want to pay for these things. I think you'd make a valid argument for closing down or repurposing treatment rooms, divide it in two and just have one that's there for emergencies and some of the nurse work that you're going to be delegating to. But there are probably those consequences that we need to consider as well. Back to you, Matt.
Yeah, so you're going to inevitably walk into this situation where simplicity is the key. And we might think that what we can do is bulk bill here and we can charge for all these things over here. And that sounds great. It sounds like it makes sense. But in reality, can you imagine the level of number of conversations that have to happen? Oh no, that's free, but this isn't. You can do this, but we can't do that. And then trying to explain all of that, that complexity will come at significant cost, and that cost will be staff time, etc. And so I think, for me, the other part, there'll be people here who they want out of their practice. So they may say, you know what, I'm just going to take this, pump up my numbers for a year or two, and then be done. And that might be a legitimate, and they may not care about what's left behind or a legacy that's behind them. They may just be like, look, I want to get my best return. If I do this, maybe my profits temporarily will bump for 20% or something. Well, that means I can get a 3 or 4 times multiple of that, extra few hundred grand, and I'm out. So there'll be people who pick that. But in terms of sustainability in terms of the business, in terms of your personal sustainability, I think we need to tread very, very carefully through this. And so it probably brings us to the next part, which is, say maybe you decided against jumping straight into this. Because remember, you might say no now, but you may change your mind in the future. But if you say yes now, changing your mind in the future, I think, may be quite different. But say there's people who say, you know what, actually, we've thought about it, we've involved our team, we've looked at our patient base, we've talked about it with the doctors and the staff. We've really decided that no, this isn't us. We're going to stick to our current billing model, whether it's mixed billing, fully private billing, whatever it is. Now, this group needs to be very, very cognizant of the changes that are happening. And so I think it will be useful, maybe using your framework again, Todd, now if you come back to it, of the cheapest, value, premium, and then luxury. Maybe I think that might be a useful lens through which to...
Yeah, absolutely. And then I think, Sachin, one thing I'd like to pick up on before I jump into that is just what you talked about earlier. So average clinic margins based on billings are somewhere like 7 to 8%. And so if you're getting a 12.5% bonus based on the vast majority of your work, the odds are that you're running cash flow negative for somewhere between 90 and 120 days. So effectively, the government is using you as a way of funding the costs of running your private enterprise until you get that payment. And if anybody steps in the way of you getting that payment, you could be screwed. And so you are putting everything on that one tick that every one of these consultations has been complied with. Based on my Medicare's performance to date, it isn't fit for purpose. All of the information will be centered around what happens in my Medicare. And I would not be confident in that tool at this point in time being the arbiter of whether my clinic survives or not. Because if you have to go and argue the case, it already takes 90 days plus processing time. So around about 100, 120 days. So very much like PIP. If we use that as the baseline, then you could be looking for the next cycle until you got paid. That's a really important consideration. But going through cheapest, value, and premium and luxury, I think what you'll find, Sachin, between cheapest and premium, there's value. That will disappear. So value is probably that group that privately bill somewhere between 20 and 35% of their patients, particularly if this clinic was in Triple M2 and above. They're just not going to, they're not going to hang around and wait. They have to commit one way or the other, go harder to try and privately bill more people, or actually just give in and bulk bill a lot. And so there's probably not going to be much left in that value box. They're all going to go to premium, and there'll be a small amount that go to luxury and prestige, where that's a really full service offering. Well, let's just park that for now and ignore those for the purposes of this conversation. And premium is going to be the area where they're privately billing probably somewhere between 50 and 80% or more of their current population. And so for those practices, they need to go really deep on who they look after, understand that patient avatar and the GP avatar really well, because ultimately they bring those two together. They're going to have to be masters of adding value in consults and then adding value outside of the consultation through asynchronous means of communication of results, organising referrals, just having a really full suite of ways that people can access what they need in between in-person, face-to-face consults. You'd expect clinics to be really slick, they have really good payment processes, for there to be really minimal friction between people having a need and having that addressed. That's going to be the primary objective there. And again, recognising that they might not get all of that patient's care, but they do need to make sure that those people are signed up to My Medicare to access enhanced MBS numbers, particularly longer telehealth item numbers, and also the CCMPs. And then they've got to make a decision as to whether they bulk bill that kind of service or not. But at least you have a little bit of flexibility that if you just started bulk billing it, you might change your mind later on and have a full private approach to that work. And again, just understanding the GP avatars that you recruit will be really important here. I think people do like having autonomy over the fees that they set. That's a base driver of any professional. They don't want somebody else dictating their fees, because usually the people who dictate their fees are not looking at their overheads, both personal and business related. And your personal overheads vary for a lot of reasons. You got young kids that are about to go to school, or you've just upgraded your house. A lot of reasons why you might want to change the avatar of who you work with and the value of the services that you deliver in that. So I think that's probably the separation we're going to see, Sachin. And those full service clinics will do a lot of the treatment room based stuff. So procedures around IUDs, implants will also be around the skin cancer type work that you see in more premium practices. You're going to see a lot of that happen in those environments now, because the alternative will be non-GP specialists, which invariably be substantially higher cost, but also they're usually done in private hospital facilities. They don't usually have those facilities in their rooms. And so that is likely the competition for those type of services.
Yeah. I think what you just mentioned about patient avatar versus GP avatar is really important here. A lot of conversation I've seen online is patients wanting to pay or not wanting to pay or whatever. The reality is, if there's not enough clinicians to see them, they're going to have to make a call. And everything that I have seen, read, and the numbers I've seen in terms of surveys is that less and less GPs want to fully bulk bill. And so that being true, then they're going to want to be in an environment where they have more autonomy over their charges and over their ability to charge. And so it's really that side of the equation that's going to dictate the success or otherwise of government policy. And so, and yeah, there's some role replacement, etc., that they're playing around with. But once you get a few scare stories and real stories of underqualified people trying to fulfill GP roles and people coming to harm, it will make headlines. And so the reality is that people know that if you want quality and reliable and trustworthy healthcare, primary care, that in most cases starts with the general practitioner. And so I think being really clear and understanding who, as a practice, the GPs that you serve are, and really making sure your messaging is clear to them, the ones that you already have, but maybe you're trying to attract more, that's going to be super important. And as you do that, I think that what you just talked about, adding value, is going to be really important. And when we think about the modern world, I feel like an old man now saying that. When you think about the world and consumer behavior right now, people don't like friction, as you said. They like convenience, they like accessibility. They're used to getting anything they want at the click of a button. That doesn't mean we just give people willy-nilly what they want. But when there's a genuine need for a renewal of my prescription or my referral letter or whatever it is, they want and expect to be able to access that pretty simply. And so we really need to think about, from my perspective, 4 domains, get ourselves further away from cheapest towards premium, and maybe not luxury, but premium definitely. And those 4 domains, I think there's going to be a physical environment of the practice. There's going to be the experience, so a seamless experience. Convenience has been thought of. My needs as a patient have been thought of.
Yeah, it should be highly personalized, right?
Yeah. Then we're going to need to think about the services, like the variety of services that are needed. And then it's going to be the people involved, because it's the humans that really differentiate it. And so I think we need to be thinking about our upgrades and our differentiation in those 4 ways. And yeah, there'll be technology and there'll be other things intertwined there, but they're the key elements that we need to really work through meticulously. And we've been doing that and talking about that in Project X with the members, and I know that they've had some really interesting and spirited discussions on it. But I think time is running out. We're recording this in August, so less than 3 months. People not only need to make these decisions, but the people coming through our doors, patients and doctors, need to feel these things, and our team needs to be aligned around the delivery of these things. And we need to be clear that everyone in the team actually believes in what we're delivering, because here, those days of the receptionist at the front saying, "Oh, I'll change the billing," or that one in particular, apologizing for charging, those behaviors are not going to help us last long in this new environment. So we really need people who are proud to be there, proud that we charge, and have a faith and confidence that the value we're delivering far outweighs the costs involved in availing of that care.
Absolutely. It's interesting. If we think about the areas where people will go wrong, I think one of them is trying to add too much value and committing to the cheapest. So trying to deliver really good quality care, including preventative care, 25, 30-minute consults, and fully bulk billing. Now, there'll be more latitude for this when you have the higher triple M, because you do get a more reasonable amount per consult. And so that may delay or somewhat vary the reality in those places. But again, those are typically more resource constrained. And so acquiring the right people, the right doctors, those all become an issue and in of themselves usually drive up prices. That's usually the way market mechanics work. So one way that people make a mistake will be overcommitting on the delivery side and under receiving on the income side. There's going to be 2 groups of people that are screwed by this. It'll be women, because the evidence is pretty clear that women conduct longer consults than do men, and they tend to look after more comprehensive care. So again, comprehensive care and women will be more disadvantaged under a system that rewards volume and more brief consults. So I think it's important to make sure that you're in the right environment to shine, because this will be much more transactional in the bulk billing value, cheapest world rather. And so that's important to understand. And then the other group will be the people that are in the premium space that don't appropriately differentiate. So they offer the same healthcare as if you were coming in and it's bulk billed, and they just stack them up and watch them fly approach. Long queues of people, long wait times, pretty undifferentiated care, dealing with one superficial issue. Anything more than that, make another appointment, come back. That's going to be the other problem, where you're offering a service that is charging a premium, but it's very much a value or a cheapest quality in terms of delivery or even the experience. So I remember hearing this from Diary of a CEO, listening to Bartlett talking about an encounter with his hairdresser. And the hairdresser goes to his house, cuts his hair, has the same thing done every 4 weeks or whatever it might be. It might be more often, I'm judging by my own personal experience. Anyway, at the end of one of these encounters, Steve says, it felt like you really rushed that haircut. And they looked at the time, the amount of time spent was exactly the same. They looked at what he did, it was exactly the same. And so they're a bit puzzled that they both felt like it was a bit rushed. And in the end, the hairdresser said, I know what it is. I didn't do my finishing flourish. And he said, what do you mean? And so at the end of a haircut, the hairdresser, and most hairdressers do this, will look around, check for everything, do a couple of snips, and then that's a sign to everybody that the consultation, that the haircut has finished. They start to take the thing off, they brush around the back, and there's a routine that goes with ending the consult. And so it was a really interesting reminder that all consults that are higher quality should have a little bit of theatre involved in the beginning and the end, so that everybody knows what's happening. And the objective of a quality consultation in the premium part of the spectrum is that you've captured all the things that they may need in the interval between the next visit. So you've reminded them. That's like that, you go to Bunnings and you ask for a drill, and they don't ask you what it's for. They just give you the drill. Say, hey, what are you using that for? I'm going to drill a hole, put up a shelf. Cool. Have you got all the things you need for that? No. Okay, well, after they're anticipating what you will need, and that feels great because you don't have to waste more time. So again, remembering the main asset of people in the premium part of the spectrum is time, and they tend to have more of an abundance of money. You must respect their time, be highly organized, highly structured, and anticipate the things that they're going to need before they need them. That's less relevant. In fact, I'm going to say it's almost irrelevant, because you probably want to encourage that person to come back for another brief encounter to get those other things. And it's fairly reasonable on the phone to say, hey, listen, if you forgot something, you need to make an appointment and come and have that attended to. So it's relatively easy on the phone to have that stuff addressed, because you're like, yep, come back, we'll book you for another 10-minute consult.
I think this is super useful, because I think when someone listening to this might be like, yeah, I've got to get all of this ready now. No, this is a ongoing journey of business and improving the experience. There'll be some improvements for our team, improvements for our end users, GPs and patients. And so we've seen people, I think, what was it, the intensive 3 years ago, we did the patient journey. And since then, people have been continually working on elevating the patient experience. And so I think the big message for anyone listening to this, you might feel tremendous pressure. I have to fix it all now and make everything beautiful and amazing straight away. No, I think the important thing here as a practice is to commit to a journey of constant and never-ending improvement, and then just work on one piece at a time. And if you do that sequentially, repeated small changes over a long period of time lead to massive results. And I think that's the way that you really work on differentiating yourself, starting with what's obvious. So, Todd, we've talked about going all in with the government, or differentiating ourselves and moving away from cheapest so that we're more towards premium. Where's the biggest danger for you in all of this?
I think that the challenge will come from people that are not intentional. And so unsubscribing from a label that says cheapest, there are lots of brands that have gone down market, often unintentionally, and then you can't really ever go back. It's very difficult for people to believe you are a premium brand after you've cheapened yourself. So that's one. And if you are going to make an intentional move to being bulk billing, make sure your cost structure supports being the cheapest, because that's the key. You must have a low cost structure, which is a competitive advantage. Otherwise, you're going to fail. And the reality is you're going to have to accept some trade-offs. And then when you move to the premium part, not taking that seriously and just thinking that you can charge whoever you like and that should be considered a privilege for them. You are going to need to consider what is the patient value proposition for your practice and how do you deliver on that. You've got to know your avatars you serve really deeply and well. You're going to have to engage your GPs. You cannot make this change without talking to your GPs because it's going to be very painful. And this is not one conversation, Sachin. It's probably somewhere between 4 and even as many as 10 conversations that you have around this just to make sure that you've heard everybody's perspective, taken it on board. And the truth is, some of the people that you have in your practice at the moment will not belong at whatever new space. Because again, if you go to premium and you've got somebody there who's continuing to bulk bill their services, they probably don't fit as well and they would be better placed to go and work in a practice that was engineered for that type of care. So you're going to find that there's a differentiation of GPs as well into premium, i.e. private billing, and those that are into bulk billing. And I think they're the things that are going to be the important trends to keep an eye on. As you said earlier, you must be intentional about this. If you just walk blindly into one of these two solutions, you're likely to fail.
Awesome. Well, that's been great, Todd. I've enjoyed sharing our thoughts about these November changes. We're going to have more coming about this, so keep an eye out here, subscribe to the channel on whichever platform you listen or watch. We'll be back soon. Thanks again, Todd.
Thanks, Sachin. Thanks all.